The floor is yours, man.
Good, awesome. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for some of you who I just saw join. My name's Derek Thurston. I am a solutions architect. I work at Red Hat, and today's topic is going to be faPolicyd. Hopefully, some of you are familiar with this, and if not, hopefully this will give you some insight into what it actually does on a Linux system. Not all platforms have this, but it is something that can be integrated because it's built out of the kernel. So without any further ado, I will proceed with my presentation. So one of the first things we have to look at before we talk about faPolicyd is that programs on Linux have a process to execute programs because everything's a file. In user space, a shell is your first step. And when you run a shell, there's internal commands built in. Sometimes they're not built in, so that forks a subshell possibly, which then can fork a bunch of different options, pipes, call different programs, etc. So when that happens, the kernel has a list of supported formats that it can support. And what it'll do is go through each of those different handlers until it accepts the program that you're trying to run. So that's a very high level view of how when you type something in the shell and hit enter, it processes your commands that you're passing to it. But this is important because there's a bunch of different things that happen when you hit enter. A process is created or forked, and depending on what you're doing, and there's a bunch of different things that the kernel can pick up from there. So there's user ID, session ID, audit ID, executables, details, and then from there, file descriptors are created, and then you can read more about the files. The important thing about this is available to programs in Linux. So faPolicyd takes advantage of all that. So it's the File Access Policy Daemon, and it's a framework. So what it'll do is it will take a user-defined policy, and it will apply, allow, or deny rules to your system. So you can base those rules on a path you have for a file, a hash that's generated for a file, a specific MIME type, or you can tell it to implicitly trust one of those different things in a trust file. And this has been integrated into the kernel since 4.2. Any questions so far on this?
Only asking if you want people to interrupt with questions.
Yeah, sorry. Feel free to ask questions during. I want to make it interactive. Don't raise your hand. Just if you want to jump in, go for it.
Does this have anything to do with these, like Ed Palmer and what's the other one? I forget now, but these frameworks with all these different permissions and file labels and all of that, or can you use it without all of that?
So it is its own thing, and so things like SE Linux or just ACLs in your file system are all separate. But I have a slide for that, John, and I'll cover it in a minute. But faPolicyd is what's that? I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just getting an echo.
Hey,
sorry.
How this is Jordy? Is this installed or Ansible or how?
No, so this is built into the kernel.
Okay.
The capacity to do this is built into the kernel through fa-notify. faPolicyd is its own thing that uses that.
Okay.
And yeah, so let me plug along here and I'll get to that part. And then,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. If you have any questions after that, feel free. So the framework is built up. It has a service that runs. There's a command line utility. It has a plugin, which is basically, it creates a name pipe for access to the to what's going on when you install packages, those kind of things. And then the last thing, it has its own rule language for defining allow and deny. Everything is in etc faPolicyd directory when it's installed. I'm on Fedora 35, I should mention, so it's built into that. If you're on a different distribution, it may not be, and you may have to do a build and install it. But if you're on a recent kernel, then you should have capability to do this. So under etc faPolicyd is a rules file, and that is a file that's listed in order, and it executes based on that order. So your deny all would be at the bottom, and your considerations for allows would be closer to the top. The configuration file is configures the daemon's configurations, and really this doesn't need to be touched unless you're need to performance tune for some reason on your system. But by default, this probably don't need to touch this. And then there's the last file is the faPolicyd.trust file. And what that is a list of trusted files that you have explicitly told faPolicyd through the command line utility that, hey, I want to trust this. So this would be like, if you have a custom binary you want to install on your system and you know it's good and you put it on there, this would be where you'd put that trust file. The rules file will allow trusted files through. So that's all these things kind of go closely knit together. And I will say it's slightly complicated as far as all the bits and pieces and how it works. But FA notify is the thing in the kernel. It's an API that all this is built around. This has been in the kernel for quite a while. As you can see, it's version 2.6. And basically what it does, it allows a user space to give a yes or no on execution of a program. And it can also monitor open file descriptors. And this is originally put in the kernel for virus scanning. So virus scan programs could allow or deny executed programs. One thing of note here is that this does not do notifies on deletions, renames, or file moves. Which if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because if I have a file that's a trusted file that's in a specific path in my file system, if I move it, it's no longer a trusted file because it's not in that path anymore. What it does do is it has marks, reads, writes, closes, and inits, and this requires the cap sysadmin sec for the kernel to be enabled. So if you disable that, then none of this is going to work. So here's a completely stolen picture I took from Steve Grubb, who works at Red Hat, is one of the guys who wrote this. He's mainly the person who wrote it. He has lots of presentations out there, and at the end of this, I have links to all his presentations. This is a view of sort of what I talked about, how it works. So you execute a program in Bash, the kernel does its thing, and it finds, what are you trying to run? The notify event is put out, the faPolicyd daemon takes that and goes through its listing of like trusted files or rules and decides if it's executable or not. And then the decision is passed back to the kernel for execution. So it steps in between the actual execution of the program. And here's a little more zoomed out picture of what's happening. The back end where the faPolicyd daemon gets its information from, if you have an RPM based system, it uses the database there to verify. And then also the different files that I talked about with the trust file. On the right side of this, the green box, the CLI, there's a the name pipe. That's how it talks to the daemon. And that's a way to make changes on the fly to your system without having to reload it through the systemd process. Any questions here?
Audio now.
Is this called something else? Because I'm looking through the distribution I have and I don't see any name like that.
faPolicyd?
Yeah, I don't see it.
Audio.
Yeah, so more than likely, are you on a Debian spin?
No.
No,
No, I'm-
okay.
I'm using N2 actually.
Okay. You may have to install it. So Fedora, it does not come by default. It was not on there. I had to do an install.
I don't even see a thing in it. I don't see a way to even install it unless I do it by hand. It's not in a tree, not in my possibilities here.
Yeah, and that's definitely a possibility too. Anything that's based on Fedora is going to have it as an option. As far as like how far out it's gone, like is it in Ubuntu, that kind of thing, or Gentoo, it may not be in there yet. So
What were you going to say about Debian?
I don't know if it's actually in any Debian spins or anything like that. I had a to-do to try it on Ubuntu and see, and I didn't get that far, so I apologize. If anyone has an Ubuntu system right now, they can check though, and we can update. So, John, more than likely you may have to build this if you actually want to install it. But you can talk about a reason for installing it now, because we're talking about why it's on the system. What does it provide benefit wise above and beyond what's already on your systems? So if you have an antivirus running, basically that's deny listing things. That's going to say you can't run this program. And this only applies to known malware and viruses. There's a lot more out there that's you just don't know about, right? So there's 0-day things that you could have in your system and have no idea it's a virus, and your antivirus wouldn't know either. So mandatory access controls are MACs. That's what SE Linux does. That provides a subject object rule around who you are, what you can do, and what it has access to. But with that, again, you can have an SE Linux rule created for a program that's still, you don't know where it came from. So provenance is not taken into account with that. And then basically application allow listing, which is what we're doing here, is that you're saying that you know this program's good and you want to run it. And that's what this faPolicyd will do for you. So it does have some attack points that can be looked at. Without privileges, it's possible to download malware or escalation tools and then, put it in your trusted list. There's options to change your search paths. You can do LD preload code injections, and that's a little bit beyond me even. So don't ask me any questions about that, please. But if you're root though, none of this applies to you anymore. So you have access to maintain and run that service. You can just stop it. It doesn't matter. So, but at that point, you have full control of the system anyway. So it's not going to help you at that level. But for userland, it's definitely a useful tool. Any questions? Has anyone checked Ubuntu yet to see if it's available? Someone's got to be on Ubuntu here. Maybe we'll find out later. So the ship policy goals of this are to prevent security bypasses using the linker program, the LD.so. We don't want to inject code into the LD preload And everything that's on your system as an approved executable has to be a package like an RPM that was delivered, or it has to be in the trusted files. Anything that's unpackaged or untrusted can't run. Anything that's an ELF or Python file has to come from system directories. And it talks about other languages are not allowed or must be enabled. There's if you wrote your own, I don't know, came up with the latest programming language you built yourself, you're going to have to add it manually to this. It has a list of known types that are out there, but that's on you.
So there, so in my, if I'm, been around way too long. So in the olden days, we had a method where we basically mounted home with no exec, and most of our files where all the executables were read only, at least to the end user, right? Also controlled by the kernel. This seems to build on that same thing, but just more advanced. Is there any kind of changes that you can think of that makes this approach better than the old approach of just doing it very vanilla and say, hey, if you're a user, you have no access to do this?
I would say no, from a user perspective. Possibly from a administrator perspective, this would be better, because by default, if you get an RPM delivered to you, that is added to the RPM DB, and that's going to be a trusted file because you explicitly said yum install or DNF install, and now it's in there. So management wise, I would think that's less complicated, but this also prevents users from moving stuff around and making your own copy of LS and running it from wherever you want. It keeps things in place and executable for them. But the other thing too, it does file integrity checking. So if the file integrity is changed based on a hash value, if something gets added to a program, then that would be an advantage as well. Hopefully that sort of answers the question.
It sort of does. I just wanted to see if we can make some kind of differentiation here.
Yeah, there's probably not much. This is just the cool way of doing it now. So FA policy, I have a typo there. FA policy D-CLI. This is the command line interface into the daemon. And if you do a -- list, it'll list all the rules that you're gonna descend through when you're trying to run a program as a regular user. And at the top here, you see different languages. That's what I was just mentioning, where if you have a new language or something, or maybe something non-standard, you'd have to add it to that specifically to allow it to run. There's some things in there at the very top for booting the system up. Otherwise, the system won't boot. But beyond that, it's pretty standard rules for what you need to run and execute stuff, and it's already been figured out. The order of this list does matter too. So if you move any of these around, things will probably stop working immediately. But this is also FA policy D-CLI command is a way you can add things to your trusted list as well from the command line. So that makes it a little bit faster as far as if you have something you know should work, you can add this, it'll put it in the policy, and then you can, it'll be stored in the policy. The other thing it provides too is a report on stats on what it's done. So it'll tell you everything that its attempts are made to execute, and give you basically this is a tool to help you size things. And I talked about the conf file that you don't need to touch. You may need to touch it if you're seeing things in here that's, if you have tons of people on a system and they're and there's lots of activity with different weird programs. Maybe you have to increase your buffers, those kind of things. So installation, very straightforward on a Fedora-based system. This is a yum install or DNF install faPolicyd, and then you do a system CTL enable now, and that'll enable it and start it at the same time. Or maybe if you're in John's boat on Gentoo, you might have to download the build instructions and actually do a compile and everything to get what you need. I will say that the documentation is pretty good on this. So if you do want to try a build on it, it's pretty straightforward, and the author is very responsive to questions, especially on his GitHub if you run into issues. I feel like I already went over this, but I'll do it just in case I didn't. My slides got a little messed up earlier. Everything's in Etsy faPolicyd directory, and inside there's the rules file, configuration file, and there's a trust file as well. The rules file is the listing that I just showed you a minute ago, right here, where that's just the command line tool reading the rules file from top to bottom.
So I'm thinking, is there a kill seal here, the daemon? I mean, what would happen if someone manages to kill the daemon? It doesn't seem like the kernel is really catching any of this without the daemon existing. Is that the right way of reading the architecture here?
Yeah, that's true. If a user has a way to kill it, then this is not going to work.
Okay.
But it's a root process, so I'd say if someone has access to do that, you have bigger problems already.
Well, a lot of the other security, including SE Linux, they are directly interpreted by the kernel without a daemon running, right? So if you have chmod or file attribute or whatever, it doesn't depend on something else running. Once it's configured, the kernel sees it itself before it passes it onto user space.
Oh, so in that case, I might be wrong about this then. It's an experiment we can try too, maybe at the end to see if I just do a kill on it as root, what happens.
Well, if you kill it, it will most likely be started again by systemd. But if you're managing to disable it there, will the kernel be able to enforce these policies without the daemon?
Yeah.
Given you're on the notify, to tell the kernel what to do. I wonder if it goes into panic and say, I won't allow anything.
Yeah, well, there is one way to do that. If you run a ptrace on it, it definitely does not like that. So mostly because it's sort of like inward belly button looking forever, and then it just craps the whole system out. So for lack of a better term. So onward. There's an integrity checking feature in here. So file size checking is the default. That's the fastest. There's a hash comparison tool. And by default, this does not do integrity checking. The default file size one is the fastest, but it's not turned on. So you have to actually go in and enable that. And that's in the configuration file. This to me seems like one of the more useful things if you're really concerned about what's on your system and what's running, creating the hashes for stuff. Because there's lots of other ways to prevent access to programs through ACLs and SE Linux context and those kind of things. This is probably the most user-friendly way to do it. Any kind of allow, deny stuff. compared to those other ones. So the access control policy, there's a decision, a subject, and object. There's a decision pattern. Decisions can be allow audit, deny audit. And the subjects, you can choose from any of those different things that I mentioned way back at the beginning from that's passed from the FA notify API in the kernel. And then you can choose object attributes like a path or a file type or a hash on a file. And you can have multiple of these subject and objects and have them ANDed together. So that adds another layer of complexity / security. So anyway, a list of statements. I put this in here for when I push these slides out to anyone who's interested, just for completeness. And then your object statements. Exec dir's is one thing. You notice that home directory is not in there. So by default, running stuff out of your home directory, if you have a binary, you want to share it out with other people in the system, then it's not going to work. So that's, I guess you shouldn't really be putting binaries in your home directory anyway, if you're being a purist. So when I run a program, you get output that's logged to somewhere on your system. And this is one interesting thing about this. There's a bug that without any audit D rules on your system, you can't see this stuff, but it's an open bug. So I haven't been able to figure out how to, from userland, to actually see these rules get denied unless you run it as a, you have to run it as a background and output the logs to a local file. Otherwise, it's just somewhere, which I thought was kind of interesting, but that's probably based on how it works with the kernel and how it's set up. But you can get output. You just have to run it to from the command line, faPolicyd, and then redirect standard error out to a file. And you can see these kind of things. This is an example here. I ran just the ls command earlier. So it shows you exactly what rule it's hitting in the list. So that's kind of convenient. Oopsie. So the top line, I ran user bin ls. It says it's an executable and a trust equals 1. So it's a trusted file from the RPM database, or from bash, excuse me, or RPM database. Yeah. And
Audio now muted.
So it doesn't write into the log, into the system logs, any of this stuff, or, can you, is there a debug mode where you can write all
Yes.
these system logs?
yeah, there's a debug mode. It's very interesting, Don, because this is the first time I had to kind of dig deep on this to find out why this is such a pain. And I've listed later on the current open GitHub issue that's open. So yeah, so you can get it. You just can't run it as a daemon in the background because maybe it doesn't care. When you shut down, that's when you can actually generate all your stats too. So definitely an issue. But yeah, and maybe I missed something too. I don't know. It's like I said, it's very interesting. But when I run this ls command, you can see it's going through the LD Linux library, and it's going into the ld.so.cache file. And you see various different things happening. Some of these things are trusted, some are not, but some are passing on just on the path alone or the file type. So there's a lot going on and a lot to decipher. The next thing I'll talk about is the rules file that's in etc faPolicyd. That I did a listing before using the command line tool. This is the actual raw rules file. So the previous slide where I was showing like rule 9 for the top one, I'm running the ls command. If I go down to rule 9 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9. So allow trusted programs to execute. So allow perm equals execute all trust equals 1. Trust equals 1 means that it passes and it can execute, and that's where it's going to drop out of the rules descending order. It passed all the other things potentially at the top or didn't pass them based on what they are, but it got to that one and said it was good, and that's what it let it execute. So it's kind of like a firewall rules, I guess, for IP tables, but so this is, I'm not going to do this, but you can generate rules using the permissive and debug. And what this will do is output things that are not allowed to run or run. And you can actually take those lines that you see, decision equals deny, and you can modify your rules file to allow for those things. Putting them in the right place in the file, that's where a little bit of experience probably is going to come in. If you're going to do this on a system that maybe for work or something like that, I would definitely do it on a system that is non-production, especially, but something that you don't mind the possibility of deadlocking. So if it's in a data center somewhere and it hangs, then you might have to go do a reset or something, but maybe test it as a VM, get your rules correct, and then slap it on a physical server, a local VM. Any questions on that there? I know this is riveting stuff, so.
So, I mean, my biggest question is, are you going to cover a little bit about, okay, I made a screw up and I'm denied access. How do I temporarily get in? So, not being denied and fix the problems. I mean, how do you do basically recovery if you make a mistake?
Yeah, so I have a demo at the end here that'll show that very simple version of that. Yeah. So hopefully, I don't know, this won't be too much longer, I don't think, here. But faPolicyd integrity checks you can enable through the configuration file, and you have to choose one of the options that were mentioned before. So in this case, the example is a hash, a SHA-256 hash on the file, and you restart the service and it loads that in, and then now those files will be matched on their hashes to either be allowed or denied. And one of the ways to search for these events, this is the way that's supposed to show you what's going on, that you're asking about, John. The audit search, AU search, you can list FA notify events. Right now on my system, I just get nothing. Doesn't matter what happened. And this is the way you're supposed to be able to see what's going on. But I've also put the open issue on GitHub that's there with this if anyone's interested in diving into it a little more. Couple of FAQs here. Can this work with other distros? Absolutely. And this is from the author's page here. So there's a backend API that can trust any source that it has to implement. So someone who knows the Debian package database, for example, could implement a new backend and send a pull request. They are looking for collaborators. So anyone who's interested, feel free to write some C, it looks like. So SE Linux and AppArmor, can they do this? And SE Linux is more about application behavior. You know, are you allowed to access this as the Apache web server daemon? It's not really concerned where it came from or whether it's known to the system. It's just like, you're not supposed to be here, you need to leave. So those are the mandatory access controls. faPolicyd cares about, is it a known application on your system? And then does it match these requirements that you've listed in your rules file? And there actually is a NIST publication for anyone who's interested in government requirements for things that breaks down application waitlisting. That's a non-PC term that they're using. So now it's demo time. Are there any questions at all before I dive into hopefully a successful demo?
Just a quick question here, Derek. Do you
Sure.
see this layer of security being implemented as like in future STIGs implementations?
Yeah, it's actually in the rel stig right now, in rel 8.
Okay.
It's one of those you got to have it turned on things. So yeah, that's a good question. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, and yeah, so you got to turn it on. And if you're a maintainer of a system, a lot of my customers have their own home built applications they put on there. They would have to modify their faPolicyd setup to actually run those.
All right. Thank you. Good deal.
Yep. All right, demo time. I'm gonna just drag my screen here up. Can you all see this now? I have a terminal
We
up on
can,
the screen.
yes. Yeah, and it's very easy to
Yep.
check.
Okay, good. Yeah, well, I have to make it that big so I can see it too. So right now, I've already installed the daemon on here. If I was to do it on a brand new installed system, that's all I got to do. It's like, hey, you've already installed it. Cool. Otherwise, it would install it for you. So that's the install for Fedora-based releases. It's starting to sound like if you're not running on one of these, that it's going to be a lot harder to get this on your system. The next step, enable it. So system CTL FA, enable FA policy d.service now. That copies the files, systemd files over to the correct place, and -- now tells it that I want it running immediately. So now we should be able to do systemctl status faPolicyd. All right, so that's running now. The next thing we do is go into faPolicyd directory. So I'm cding to etc faPolicyd. So what I have in here is a bunch of files previously mentioned, faPolicyd.conf, a .rules, and a .trust file. Configuration file, just take a quick look at that. There is everything this thing needs to run. The most important things, it's running in enforcing mode. The permissive equals 0 at the top of the configuration file. If you set this for permissive, this is how you would generate your rules. Although I'm still not sure how you get them or from what log they would come from. So something to work on, I guess. And the other thing that's not in here that I mentioned is the hash checking, or basically looking at a file path or a hash. None of that's in here. If you want to enable that, you have to add it to the file. So that was the configuration file. And then let's see, let's look at the rules. Rules real quick. These are the rules top to bottom, like a firewall. If you want to see them, you can just do -- list. And that's a little bit prettier way of seeing what's going to get hit on the rules list, but also it gives you the numbers for each rule that are in the system. And then what's the last thing we have? The trust file. Let me try to make sure it stays near the top so everyone can see this thing here. So there's a default trust file that's in there. They have an example. And right now I have no trusted files in there. That's just the example at the top. But it takes the full path of the file, the size, and the hash of the file. And then faPolicyd CLI command, there's a -- help, of course. So if you want to see what the rules are or what's trusted, you can do a bunch of things and list stuff. Probably the most important thing here is the update command. And there's also a trust file command. So you can add files to the trust file from the command line. But once you do that, you have to run the update afterwards. So the first thing we can do here, let's see.
Audio now.
So the question, so if you just installed it, then you have to generate those rules by hand, or how do you do that?
No, so because if you remember a little bit back, you couldn't see the diagram. Obviously, the back end of this is these configuration files and the RPM database.
Oh, so if you don't have that, then what?
Yeah, so it's going to use the RPM database by default to gather trusted files from the system. So anything that's installed with the release should be trusted. Anything that I've added after the fact will not be trusted until I actually add it to the trust. So I have a example of this here. Let me just switch screens. I'll go a little bit off. So this is my just regular user. I have now dthirsto. I'm sitting in my home directory, and I have a file in here that's an app image. So a binary file. It's executable to me. If I want to run this, I'm going to try to execute it. It's going to say operation not permitted. So what that means is that faPolicyd is saying you are not allowed to run this file. Now, if I want to add this here to my trusted list of files as a root user, this guy wants to run his file. Okay, cool. I'm going to say faPolicyd-CLI. Then I'm going to go file, add. I'm going to add this home dthirsto, and then this app image that I have. So now if I look at my trust file, faPolicyd, faPolicyd trust, you're going to see now that image is added in there. So it added in the path to the file, the size, and then the hash of the file. If I go back to my regular user now and try to rerun this, I'm still going to get operation not permitted. And that's because the daemon's running, it hasn't reloaded this file. It doesn't go back until you tell it to go back or restart it. So as the root user, I would do an update without a J at the end. So faPolicyd was notified. So now that means that faPolicyd has gone in, it's reread the rules and all the other stuff. And then if I try to execute this as a user, I've never actually, this is a GUI app, so I don't know what this is going to do, but now we have a different error that's related to the fact I'm in a terminal and it's a desktop application. So, but now it's been allowed through faPolicyd. So that's adding a custom binary to my system to the trusted file. Similarly, if let's say I'm a sort of malicious user on my system. I'm in my home directory. I'm going to say, okay, cool. I like, I'm going to copy user bin ls to temp. No problem, right? I have write access to temp. I should be able to do that. But now if I want to execute my program, it doesn't work. Okay, well, same deal. If I want to allow this for some reason, I could do the same thing, add to the trust file. That's not very exciting as far as demo purposes go, but
So if you install a package that has multiple binaries, you have to add each one individually?
well, if you install a package, it should be in the database and should be trusted. If that makes sense. So if I do a DNF install, and if it's not trusted, then there's a way to add in, you do the debug mode. I mean, we can try that. I just need a RPM to install. But yeah, if it's in the database, then you're saying it's trusted, and as long as it matches the path values from the RPM database and the size and the hash generated. So there's multiple requirements for each file. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, there's a lot of like little bits to this. So it makes it a little bit interesting. But what I can do now is show how to generate the, if you want to add a custom whatever to your system, how you can generate rules for it. So as the root user, I'll clear my screen. I'm going to stop faPolicyd. And then I'm going to go, I will say this, there is a log for the daemon that does not show you the denies, but var log faPolicyd access log. So this shows you all the files that were accessed while it was running. And there's a lot because, you know, when you run a program, it jumps around to different dependencies, those kind of things, especially shell-based stuff. And it gives you stats at the end as far as like how you're doing, the cache size, etc. So that doesn't give you anything as far as the allow deny. So what I'm about to do is going to show you how do you generate those statements so you can actually create a rule for something that's a custom thing. I'm going to actually remove my oh, what am I doing? Policy trust. I'm going to remove my file that I added to the trust file now. Fun fact too, if you do that and restart it, you have to still do an update to the daemon to tell it to actually check that file again, which is kind of weird, but so I'm going to start faPolicyd and in the foreground and then background it from the command line. So faPolicyd, I'm going to run debug. I'm going to redirect standard error policyd out file. I'm going to run it in the background. Cool. So now faPolicyd is running on the system. Let me run the faPolicyd CLI. And now if I try to run my program from my home directory again, I should get the operation not permitted. And then what this will do is I'm going to kill the debug job I have running. Then we can look at the output here. So at the beginning of this, when it starts up, it's going to list all the rules that are in the system. I'm going to scroll through. Here's all the different mount points it loaded. And then it says starting to listen for events. From that point, it's going to list everything that was happening on the system. So what I'm looking for now for something that's not working is a DEC equals deny, what's decision equals deny. So I'm going to search for that. Oops. Okay. So I got did I do a less on this file? No, I didn't. Okay. I ran the update, so it reloaded again. So the first, after I ran the update, then the next thing I did was run the command as a regular user. There's a deny audit in there with me trying to execute this program from my shell. And as you can see, at the end of this, trust equals 0. So immediately it was like, all right, that's not trusted. I went to the next rule and it said, it's allowed to run after that. And then let's see, where's the next deny? /deny. This might make it a little easier. Well, I get denied on rule 15 and apparently 16 hit there too.
Why is it saying allow when trust equals 0?
Yeah, I know. Well, that's kind of interesting, right? The problem with that is that it was denied first, but it matched 2 other rules to allow it. So, and I don't know why that is actually. That's kind of weird. But when I ran it, I definitely got operation not permitted, right? So it said, hey, you can't run this file. So what you could do for this here is copy this deny that you have. And the key part is it's rule 15 that said deny. So anywhere, if I want to put this in there in my rules file, I would have to put it above rule 15. That was the thing that actually denied it. So we can go look and see what that was here real quick. Oh my Lord. All right. So I'm going to go to the faPolicyd rules. And then the numbers don't line up here conveniently, but I have to count down from the top. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 12, 13, 14, 15. Oh, good. So the rule that denied it was that's 15 there, sorry. Deny execution for anything untrusted. So it passed through everything fine until it got to this rule 15. Rule 16 we saw was allowing because it says allow everything else to open a file. So 15 stopped it and 16 logged for some reason that it was okay. So the most important part is the fact that it was denied. So now if I want to add this in as a rule here, I can basically cut and paste what I have before. I need to strip some stuff out. I need to insert and allow. Oh man, I just hit the wrong key. I have used VI before in case anyone's wondering. Though it does not seem like it right now. Let's see, I don't need any of that. So some of these things you have to strip out. So let's see if this works. So what I did was I took that same error message and I put it in my the rules file. So when faPolicyd is getting the fa notify message that this program is trying to run, it should pass through here and say, okay, cool. This is on the allow list. I need to add a trust in here. Trust equals 1. So I've done that. I'm going to start faPolicyd now. And if I do a faPolicyd list, rule 15 is now my silly application in my home directory that I want to be able to run. And then after that's deny everything else. And hopefully if I put this in the correct format, it should let me run it. There you go. So that's multiple ways to add it. Frankly, I think using the faPolicyd CLI, or sorry, faPolicyd CLI -- file and adding it to the trusted files thing is a lot faster and easier. But if you have multiple applications, maybe in a home directory you want to add, you can do it this way. Sort of like Linux, there's way too many, I shouldn't say way too many. There's lots of different ways and options to do it. So
In regards to the update flag, does that allow it to survive reboots as well? Or you need to pass something like dash dash permanent, kind of like firewall D, you know?
Yeah, so because I added to the rules file and I just started it, it read it in. It does persist. Same thing for the trust file. If you add a trusted file to the thing and you reboot it, no, it's a lie. The trust, when you add something to the trust file, you need to tell the database to update. And if you're, I don't know if that works across a reboot, like if it'll automatically update it on reboot, but from my experience so far, it doesn't do it until you explicitly say, I added something here, read it in.
Okay, good deal.
So let me go back to my presentation here. I think sort of successful demo, hopefully. I know it wasn't that exciting, but nothing actually broke, so that's good. I have a list of all the references for faPolicyd that I used. And I thought this was kind of funny. I actually have on my GitHub, I have a walkthrough of this that I created last year that I totally forgot about. So I found that after I did all these different things. So when we send out the slides, put them on the website, you all will have access to and click on these links and everything. That's it though. I don't even have an end thank you slide or anything. So thank you. Now I'd like to field all the questions that I have about how the kernel works and stuff I don't really fully understand. So
That was really awesome, man. Thank you. Very informative.
yeah, glad I could do it. I'm going to try to find out more about the different distros out there that maybe don't necessarily have it by default and what kind of uplift it is to get it installed on there.
One of the things I would love to know once you find out is if this is available, why would they choose not to include it? I mean, maybe not enforce it as a install by default, but why would this not just be there as an option?
Yeah. You mean for a non-RPM, a non-Fedora based release?
Whatever, let's say you mentioned Devin. Let's say they decided not to. I would love to know the reason not to. Versus, hey, we just don't think it's good enough to be there by default.
Yeah, I don't know. I sort of feel like this is going to be like AppArmor, where they're sort of standing their ground for whatever reason they have, and now eventually, like they're like, all right, we'll use SE Linux too. You know, it's we'll end up getting integrated at some point.
The eternal battle to who has the most resources to actually maintain it. So, yep.
Yeah, it's
where we end up
interesting.
every
I
time.
mean, I think in the end though, I mean, it's open source. It's the good ideas will win out over the ones that aren't as good. So
True. Cool, but yeah, this is definitely one of those areas where I go, you think you know Linux, and then someone comes around like you and shows you stuff you haven't seen before.
yeah, well, I'd also like to state I've been doing Linux since the 90s. So I'm sure probably not as long as you, Peter. No offense, but
Well, 90s is sort of where it came around. So if you did it before that, and I
yeah,
know.
then you're a liar. I might have used some SGI Unix back then too, but anyway.
Yeah, we need a junior person with 35 years experience in Linux, right?
Yeah, but I will say though, I will never claim to be an expert on anything in Linux because there's always something that's a step level deeper and darker than what I fully understand. So I knew this was here. I knew how to configure it. I definitely learned a little bit more going into the bits on how it executes, and getting some hands-on time with it was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And I see Gustavo says it should work under Alma Linux and Rocky. That's correct. Especially the Rocky stuff. I've never touched Alma Linux, but should be in CentOS Stream.
To me, but the important part is this is not a proprietary Red Hat only solution, right?
Right.
It is out there. It's just a matter of has it been adapted by none, I will guess, Red Hat or family tree distributions.
Yeah, completely. And that's one of the nice things I like. I like Steve Grubb. I've met him a few times. He's got no allegiance to anyone other than the Linux kernel and doing what's right for the community. So, and he'll tell you that. Any other questions? You want me to? I can pick people out of the audience to see what they think. I'm not going to actually do that. So.
No, I just it to me, in today's environment with as many hacks as we see, and my worst problem is it's not necessarily because it was a typical thing to hack. I mean, a lot of times this is not secured. We have a ton of tools like this. One of the links I provided is actually covering this and a lot more tools to help secure your things. And I think this is, if you're just starting out, this is going to be one of the things that you really got to know. Because security is not a chmod anymore. It's a lot more than that. So
Yeah, 100%. And with things like supply chain issues as well. I mean, this is something that, depending on where you get your distro from, I mean, you can say you don't trust a file in here if you don't want to have it executable on your system. So it's very flexible. Even if it's from your distro and you say, I don't want to, this file should still not be executed, this will not execute it.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in whitelisting versus blacklisting, but still it's important to know about these tools, because I'm fairly sure that if you're doing production with Linux, these are some of the things that will pop up that you need to actually implement. Not the only thing, but one of the many things.
Yep. Well, I got nothing else here.
Anyone with maybe do you want to stop the recording and then just talk about something else?
Sure.
I'll figure out where the stop button is. There we go. Yeah.